We're not funding this circus. Find someone else to pay for your freak show wedding. Those were the exact words my mother said to me 3 weeks before my wedding, while my father laughed so hard he actually slapped his knee like some villain in a bad movie. They were sitting in their pristine living room in Scottsdale, Arizona, on the white leather couch they'd bragged cost more than most people's cars. I was standing there, wedding binder in hand, watching 18 months of planning crumble because my fiancée Marissa happened to be a woman. My name is Sloane Kensington. Yes, that Kensington, the pharmaceutical fortune, the country clubs, the charity galas where everyone pretends to care about causes while comparing jewelry. I was 28 when this happened, working as a biomedical engineer, completely financially independent except for one thing. My parents had promised to pay for my wedding since I was 7 years old. It was tradition. They'd paid for my brother Trevor's $200,000 spectacle when he married his third wife. They'd paid for my sister Camden's destination wedding in Tuscany. But me? The daughter who'd never asked them for anything after college, who'd earned her PhD on scholarships, who'd saved their reputation more times than I could count. I was a circus. The cruelest part wasn't the denial of money. I could have handled that. It was laughter. My father, Richard Kensington, actually had tears streaming down his face as he mocked how I'd look in a suit, how Marissa and I would confuse the photographer, how our future children, we'd already started IVF, would be freaks too. My mother, Diane, recorded it on her phone. I found out later she sent it to their friends at the country club with crying laughing emojis. I need you to understand something about my parents. They weren't religious conservatives. They weren't traditional in any meaningful way. My father had affairs everyone knew about. My mother had been arrested twice for prescription fraud, though money made those charges disappear. They'd been to pride parades for the photos, donated to LGBTQ causes for the tax breaks. But when it came to their own daughter, when it came to their precious family image, suddenly they were concerned about propriety. Standing in their living room that day, watching them laugh at my pain, something inside me didn't break, it crystallized. Sharp and clear as the Waterford crystal they collected. They thought they were just canceling a wedding. They thought I'd slink away, maybe elope quietly, hide my relationship like a shameful secret. They had no idea they'd just declared war on someone who'd inherited their ruthlessness, but not their cruelty. My mother stopped laughing long enough to say that if I insisted on this lifestyle, I was welcome to live it far away from them. They'd already told people I was marrying a nice investment banker named Martin. They'd created an entire fictional man rather than admit their daughter was gay. She showed me the engagement announcement she'd submitted to the society pages. Martin was from Connecticut, apparently. I worked at Goldman Sachs. Very appropriate. I took a photo of that fake announcement with my phone. They didn't notice, too busy congratulating themselves on their clever solution. My father said I should be grateful they weren't cutting me off entirely, that they'd still let me attend family events if I came alone and played along with the Martin story. My mother added that Marissa seemed like a nice girl who'd surely understand that some families just weren't ready for that kind of change. That kind of change. Like love was a political movement instead of the reason I woke up every morning. I left their house without another word. Drove 3 hours back to Phoenix with my hands shaking so hard I had to pull over twice. Called Marissa from a gas station parking lot and told her everything. She just said to come home. Said we'd figure it out. Said she loved me. But I wasn't thinking about love anymore. I was thinking about something my parents had taught me without meaning to, how to completely destroy someone while smiling at them. Before I tell you how I destroyed my parents' entire world, you need to understand the universe we inhabited. The Kensingtons weren't just wealthy, we were Arizona royalty. My great-grandfather had patented 3 drugs that became household names. My grandfather had turned those patents into an empire. My father had inherited it all at 35 and spent the next 30 years playing CEO while actual smart people ran things. I grew up in Paradise Valley, in a house with 7 bathrooms and a pool that was featured in Architectural Digest. Every morning, our housekeeper Maria would wake me up for private school, where I learned Latin and calculus and how to make other rich kids feel small. I was good at all of it, especially the last part. Cruelty was basically a Kensington family trait, like our green eyes and inability to process lactose. But I was different in one crucial way: I actually worked. While Trevor was failing out of his third college and Camden was perfecting her eating disorder, I was in MIT's biomedical engineering program, designing artificial heart valves that could save premature babies. My lab supervisor said I had the rare combination of a brilliant mind and steady hands. What he didn't know is that steady hands came from years of practice hiding who I really was. I met Marissa at a medical conference in Boston when I was 25. She was presenting on pediatric neurosurgery techniques, wearing a navy dress that made her brown eyes look like amber. I sat through her entire presentation on spinal cord injuries in children, not because I cared about the topic, but because her voice did something to my chest that felt like arrhythmia. Later, at the cocktail reception, she found me by the shrimp display and said she'd noticed me in the third row, that my focus was either incredible or I was having a stroke. We talked for 4 hours. She was from a normal family in Ohio. Her dad was a mailman. Her mom taught elementary school. She'd gotten through medical school on loans she'd be paying until she was 50. She laughed at my stories about charity galas and thought it was hilarious that I knew which fork was for fish. By midnight, we were sharing a bottle of wine in her hotel room, and I was telling her things I'd never told anyone. By morning, I knew I was going to marry her. The thing about hiding your relationship from your family for 3 years is that you get very good at logistics. I had a fake boyfriend named David I'd reference at family dinners. Stock photos on my phone for proof. Meanwhile, Marissa and I bought a house together in Phoenix, adopted a dog named Gertie, and started planning for children. We were building a whole life in the shadows of my family's willful ignorance. My work at Phoenix Children's Hospital was my sanctuary. I ran the biomedical engineering department, managing a team of 12 people who designed custom medical devices for kids with rare conditions. My office was nothing like my father's monument to ego, just a desk, 2 chairs, walls covered in thank you cards from patients. One card, from a 6-year-old named Lily, whose heart valve I designed, just said, "Thank you for fixing my broken heart." I looked at it every day, reminded myself that I fixed things. It's what I did. I had one real ally in my family, my grandmother Evelyn, my mother's mother. 91 years old, sharp as surgical steel, and completely aware that I was gay. She'd figured it out years ago, told me over tea that love was love, and anyone who said otherwise was selling something. She lived in a senior community in Sedona and refused to move in with my parents despite their insistence. She said she'd rather die than spend her last years watching my mother pretend to be someone she wasn't. The wedding planning had started as something small. Marissa and I just wanted family and close friends at a vineyard in Sedona. Maybe 50 people. But then my mother got involved and said if the Kensingtons were paying, it had to be at the Arizona Biltmore, had to have at least 300 guests, and had to be in the society pages. I went along with it because I thought maybe, just maybe, they were coming around. That planning my wedding was their way of accepting who I was. I should have known better when they never asked to meet Marissa's parents. When they kept referring to my fiancé as my friend. When they insisted, the invitation said, "Mr. and Mrs. Richard Kensington request the honor of your presence," without any mention of Marissa's family. Red flags everywhere, but I was too deep in hope to see them. 3 days before they canceled everything, my mother had called about the flower arrangements. Said the florist was confused because I'd selected 2 bridal bouquets. I explained that we'd both carry bouquets, that it was actually quite common in same-sex weddings. She went quiet, then said we'd discuss it later. I heard my father in the background asking what the problem was. She told him nothing, just a little confusion about the flowers. That was the moment they decided. I know because I later found the email she sent to their lawyer that night, asking about the financial implications of canceling vendor contracts they'd signed. Please keep following this story, and if you're watching from somewhere, drop a quick comment where you're watching from. I'm curious if anyone else has dealt with family betrayal like this. The signs of my parents' true nature had been there for years, like hairline fractures in expensive china. 6 months before the wedding cancellation, they'd started their campaign of subtle humiliation. It began at Trevor's birthday party at the Phoenician Resort. Marissa was on call at the hospital, so I came alone, wearing the dress my mother had sent over. Apparently, my outfit choices were no longer acceptable. My mother introduced me to her friends as her daughter, who was so focused on career she hadn't had time for romance. When Mrs. Weatherby asked about my personal life, my mother actually said I was probably asexual, that some people just weren't built for relationships. She said it with such practiced concern, like it was a medical condition she'd come to accept. I stood there, champagne flute in hand, while 6 women discussed my presumed sexual dysfunction like I wasn't even there. 2 weeks later, at a charity gala for the hospital, my own workplace, my father told the chief of surgery that I'd be taking a sabbatical soon to deal with some mental health issues. He said it with such false sympathy and mentioned that the family was getting me help. My boss pulled me aside the next day and offered me resources for whatever I was going through. I had to explain that my father was lying, though I couldn't explain why. The damage to my reputation was already seeping through the hospital like contrast dye in a bloodstream. Then came the financial manipulation. My parents had always had access to an old savings account from when I was a minor. It had maybe $30,000, money from birthdays and graduations I'd never moved. One day it was empty. When I asked, my mother said she'd moved it to a better investment opportunity, that I'd thank her later. When I demanded it back, she got tearful, said she was only trying to help since I clearly wasn't thinking straight lately. That phrase, not thinking straight, wasn't accidental. My sister Camden became their weapon of choice. She'd call crying about how I was tearing the family apart with my selfishness. Did I know Mom had been taking anxiety medication because of me? Did I know Dad's blood pressure was up? She'd been promised a position on the hospital's charity board, but that might not happen now because of the shame I was bringing to the family. Every conversation was a masterclass in emotional terrorism. The breaking point should have been when they hired a private investigator to follow Marissa. I only found out because the guy was sloppy, got caught taking photos at the hospital. Security brought him in, and he admitted the Kensingtons had hired him to find dirt on a doctor who was inappropriate with their daughter. The security chief, who knew Marissa and I were together, called me immediately. We had to file a formal complaint to get a restraining order against the investigator, but not before he'd given my parents a full report on our life together. My mother called that night hysterical. How could I live with that woman? Share a bed with her? Were we trying to have children? The thought of it made her physically ill. She actually used those words, physically ill. Like my love was a disease that might be contagious. My father got on the phone, calmer but worse. He said if I insisted on this phase, I should at least have the decency to be discreet. Maybe Marissa could be my roommate publicly. Maybe we could have separate bedrooms for when people visited. He'd prepared a whole presentation on how we could maintain appearances. But the worst crack came from Trevor. My brother, who I'd covered for through 2 DUIs, 3 affairs, and an embezzlement situation at his first job that cost my parents $500,000 to make disappear. He sent me a text saying he supported me but couldn't risk his inheritance by saying so publicly. His wife was pregnant with their first child, a boy who'd carry on the Kensington name properly. He couldn't jeopardize that child's future for my lifestyle choice. Each humiliation was calculated to break me down, make me comply. They'd done this before with Camden when she'd dated a Hispanic man in college. Slow, steady pressure until she cracked, married the white investment banker they'd chosen instead. They thought I was weaker than Camden. They thought wrong. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of texts, recordings of phone calls. Arizona is a one-party consent state. Emails, bank statements. Marissa bought me a safety deposit box at a bank my parents didn't use. We put everything in there along with copies on 3 different cloud servers. She said I was being paranoid. I said I was in Kensington. The week before they canceled the wedding, they made one last attempt at conversion. Arranged a dinner with the son of their friends, Jonathan Ashford, heir to a hotel fortune. They told me it was a family dinner, but when I arrived, it was just Jonathan and them. My mother had actually given him my bio, my accomplishments, a photo album of me from high school. He sat there, this stranger, looking through pictures of teenage me while my parents explained what a catch I was. I excused myself to the bathroom and called Marissa. told her I was about to walk out and never speak to them again. She said to wait, to get through the wedding first, then we could cut them off completely. She was trying to protect me from losing my family. She didn't understand that I'd already lost them. They'd just been replaced by very expensive replicas who looked like my parents, but had no souls. The day they canceled my wedding started with my mother asking me to come for tea. "Just us girls," she said. A chance to go over final details. She sounded so normal on the phone, even excited. Said she'd found the perfect mother of the bride dress. Asked if I could bring the seating chart so we could finalize table arrangements. I drove to Scottsdale that morning feeling something I hadn't felt in years, hope. Maybe the wedding planning had helped them see Marissa and me as real, as valid, as worthy of celebration. I'd even brought photos from our engagement shoot to show them, pictures where we looked so happy it made my chest hurt. Marissa in her white sundress, me in a tailored suit, both of us laughing at something the photographer said. When I walked in, both my parents were there. Not just my mother. They were sitting formally, like this was a business meeting. The wedding binder I'd sent them weeks ago was on the coffee table unopened. My father was drinking scotch, even though it was 11 in the morning. My mother had her phone out, already recording. She didn't ease into it, and didn't pretend to care about my feelings. Just said they'd discussed it and couldn't in good conscience pay for something that went against nature. Those were her words, against nature. Like Marissa and I were some violation of physics rather than two people in love. My father added that they'd already called the Biltmore and canceled everything. The deposits were non-refundable, but they'd rather lose $50,000 than watch their daughter make a mockery of marriage. I asked them to stop recording. My mother laughed and said she wanted documentation of this conversation in case I tried to twist their words later. Classic Kensington move, control the narrative. I pulled out my own phone to record, and my father actually slapped it out of my hand. It shattered on their marble floor. $700 of iPhone destroyed. He said I wasn't allowed to manipulate the situation. That's when the real cruelty started. My mother pulled out her laptop, showed me the email she'd sent to all 300 wedding guests. It said the wedding was canceled due to incompatibility issues that had recently come to light. She'd made it sound like Marissa had cheated on me, or worse. She'd already received dozens of responses, people offering condolences, saying they'd suspected something was off about Marissa. My mother had thanked each one, building a narrative where I was the victim of a predatory woman. My father pulled out a folder. He'd always loved dramatic presentations. Inside were photos the private investigator had taken. Marissa and I grocery shopping, holding hands at the farmer's market, kissing goodbye at the hospital. Innocent moments made to look sordid by the angle, the zoom, the violation of being watched. He spread them out like evidence in a trial, said any judge would see this wasn't a real relationship, just confusion. But the killing blow was the trust fund. I'd forgotten about it until that moment, a $20 million trust my grandfather had set up for each grandchild, accessible at 30 or upon marriage, whichever came first. My wedding was 3 weeks before my 30th birthday. They'd had their lawyer add a morality clause the day before, stating the funds could only be released for traditional marriages that could produce biological heirs. They'd backdated it to make it look legitimate. $20 million. Gone. Not because I'd committed a crime or failed in some way, but because I loved a woman. My mother said they were doing this from love. That one day I'd thank them for saving me from myself. She actually started crying, these theatrical tears while she talked about the grandchildren she'd never have, ignoring that Marissa and I had already spent $30,000 on IVF treatments. My father said he'd arrange for therapy with someone who specialized in confusion about sexual identity. He had a business card ready. I found my voice finally and asked them if this was really what they wanted. To lose their daughter over this. My mother stopped crying instantly, like turning off a faucet. Said I'd already lost myself, that the daughter they'd raised would never choose this lifestyle. My father added that if I walked out that door with the intention of still marrying that woman, I shouldn't come back. I stood to leave, and my mother said one more thing. She'd called my work, told them I was having a mental breakdown. Suggested they put me on administrative leave for my own good. She'd called as a concerned parent and major donor. The hospital had no choice but to take it seriously. I'd probably have a message from HR when I got home. My father laughed then. Actually, I laughed. Said at least now I'd have time to reconsider my choices without work as a distraction. Maybe spend some time with Jonathan Ashford, who was still very interested despite my confusion. They'd invited him to what would have been my wedding date. I thought it would be nice to have something to celebrate that day after all. I looked at them, these people who'd raised me, who'd claimed to love me, who were systematically destroying my life because I wouldn't pretend to be straight. My mother was still recording, waiting for me to break down, to beg, to comply. My father was already pouring another scotch, satisfied with his morning's work. I said 3 words, "You'll regret this." My mother laughed. Said I couldn't do anything to them. They had the money, the lawyers, the connections. I was just a confused girl who needed her parents' firm hand. My father added that threats didn't become me, that I should maintain some dignity in defeat. I walked out, leaving my shattered phone on their floor. Drove home in silence, my mind already working through possibilities, calculating odds, designing revenge like I design a medical device, precisely, methodically, with no room for error. The next 72 hours were the darkest of my life. I got home to find Marissa already there, having been called out of surgery because the hospital had received a concerning message about my mental state. HR had placed me on immediate administrative leave pending psychological evaluation. 17 years building my career, destroyed in a single phone call from my mother. Marissa had also received messages. My parents had found her parents' phone numbers and called them to express concern about their daughter's predatory behavior toward me. Her sweet, church-going mother in Ohio had sobbed on the phone, asking Marissa if she'd done something inappropriate. Her father, the mailman who'd worked 30 years to put his daughter through medical school, asked if she was in legal trouble. We sat on our couch, Gertie between us, while Marissa called every vendor to confirm the cancellations. Everything was gone. The venue, the caterers, the flowers, the photographer who'd become a friend during our engagement shoot. Some vendors offered to rebook if we could pay immediately, but we'd spent our savings on IVF, counting on my parents' promise. We had maybe $10,000 in checking. Not enough for a wedding, barely enough for the fertility treatments we'd need to continue. That first night, I didn't sleep. I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop, searching for something, anything I could use against them. But what do you do when the people destroying you have unlimited resources and no conscience? Every lawyer I called said the same thing. The trust fund morality clause would likely hold up in court. The wedding was a gift they had no obligation to provide. The hospital situation was hearsay. I had no recourse. Marissa found me at 4 a.m., surrounded by legal websites and empty coffee cups. She sat down, took my hands, and said we should just leave. Move to California or New York where nobody knew the Kensington name. Start over. She'd already been offered positions at several hospitals. We could have a small ceremony at City Hall, build our life away from my family's poison. But running meant they won. It meant every LGBTQ kid in their circle would see that the Kensingtons could erase a gay daughter without consequences. It meant my grandmother would watch them win. It meant Marissa and I would always be looking over our shoulders, waiting for them to find new ways to hurt us. My grandmother called that second day. She'd heard about the cancellation from my mother, who'd spun it as me having a breakdown, calling off the wedding myself. But grandmother Evelyn wasn't stupid. She asked for the truth, and I told her everything. The silence on her end lasted so long I thought she'd hung up. Then she said something that changed everything. "Your parents aren't as smart as they think they are," she said. "They've been sloppy with their cruelty." And she would know. She'd been watching my mother's schemes for 60 years, keeping notes in journals she'd hidden in her apartment. She asked if I still had access to the family's financial systems. I did. My father had given me login credentials years ago when he'd traveled and needed someone to move money for him. He'd never revoked them. But what really sparked the revenge was an email from Lily's mother. Remember Lily, the 6-year-old whose heart valve I designed? Her mother had heard I was on leave and was worried about Lily's upcoming surgery. Who would monitor the valve if I wasn't there? Who would adjust the specifications if something went wrong? The surgery was in 2 weeks, right around what would have been my wedding day. That email broke something in me, but it also rebuilt something else. My parents weren't just hurting me, They were hurting sick children who needed my expertise. They were hurting Marissa's elderly patients who trusted her. They were hurting every young person who might see our wedding as proof that love wins. I called in every favor I had at the hospital, got them to agree to let me consult on Lily's case remotely. Then I started making other calls. To journalists I'd met at medical conferences. To other wealthy families who had LGBTQ children. To activists who'd been fighting the Kensington's influence for years. I didn't have a full plan yet, but I was gathering ingredients. My father had taught me something when I was young, watching him destroy a business rival. He said the key to perfect revenge was to use their own weapons against them. Make their strengths into weaknesses. Turn their pride into their downfall. He'd been so proud of that lesson, never imagining I'd one day use it on him. The third night, Marissa and I sat with our wedding guest list. 300 names, all people my parents had insisted we invite. Politicians, CEOs, judges, medical board members, journalists. People who cared deeply about their public image. People who would be very interested to know the real reason the wedding was canceled. That's when the plan started forming. Not just revenge revolution. I would use my parents' own playbook against them, but with one difference. Everything I did would be true. No lies, no manipulation, just the brutal truth delivered at the perfect moment to the perfect people. I opened a new spreadsheet, titled it Justice, and started planning the complete destruction of Richard and Diane Kensington. The plan started with research. Real research, the kind I'd do for a medical device that could kill someone if designed wrong. I spent a week in my home office, supposedly having my mental breakdown while actually building a comprehensive database of my parents' vulnerabilities. My grandmother was my secret weapon. She drove down from Sedona with 3 boxes of journals spanning 40 years. Every dinner party, every whispered conversation, every financial irregularity she'd observed. Diane had been skimming from charity funds since 1995. Richard had been bribing FDA officials to fast-track drug approvals. It was all there in my grandmother's careful handwriting, dates and names and amounts. But I needed more recent evidence. That's where my hospital colleagues came in. Dr. James Chin, yes, that's his real name, was our chief of pediatric surgery and had been at every medical charity gala for the past decade. He'd seen my father drunk, making deals that weren't exactly legal. More importantly, he had recordings. Arizona might be a one-party consent state, but even in two-party states, recordings made in public places where there's no expectation of privacy are usually admissible. Dr. Chin had been building his own insurance policy against the Phoenix medical establishment. He gave me 18 hours of audio from various events. My father discussed how to hide taxable income. My mother admitted she'd been selling prescription drugs to her tennis club friends. Both of them laughed about manipulating board positions to ensure their friends' children got into medical school regardless of qualifications. The financial research was easier than expected. My father had never revoked my access to the family investment accounts, arrogance making him sloppy. I couldn't move money, but I could see everything. The offshore accounts in the Caymans. The shell companies in Delaware. The real estate holdings in other people's names. I screenshotted everything, sent copies to 3 different secure servers Marissa had set up. Then I found the smoking gun, a trust fund my parents had hidden from the IRS. $50 million that should have been taxed at 40%, hidden through a complex web of transfers. The tax evasion alone was worth $20 million in penalties and interest, plus potential jail time. I started small, testing the waters. Created an anonymous blog called Phoenix Medical Mysteries, where I posted innocent-seeming questions. Why did certain unqualified students get into prestigious programs? How did certain drugs get approved so quickly? I never named names, just posed questions. Within days, medical professionals were commenting, adding their own observations. The blog went viral in Arizona medical circles. Marissa thought I was becoming obsessed, and she wasn't wrong. I'd lost 15 pounds, was surviving on coffee and rage. But every time I thought about stopping, I'd remember my mother laughing while canceling our wedding. I'd remember my father destroying my phone. I'd remember them calling Marissa a predator. The second week, I started reaching out to their victims. Everyone the Kensingtons had destroyed over the years. The pharmaceutical researcher whose career they'd ruined for refusing to falsify data. The charity director they'd had fired for questioning missing funds. The teenage daughter of their housekeeper who'd been assaulted by Trevor at a pool party, then paid off to stay quiet. Each person had a piece of the puzzle, and they were all eager to share. But the real breakthrough came from Camden. My sister, who'd been their perfect puppet for so long, called me crying one night. Her husband had left her, tired of the Kensington family drama. She was pregnant, alone, and our parents had told her she was being dramatic. They were too busy doing damage control over my cancelled wedding to deal with her problems. Camden had something valuable: passwords. She'd been helping Mother with her charity work and had access to all the foundation emails. She gave them to me not out of love or solidarity, but out of spite. She wanted them to hurt the way she was hurting. I'll take revenge on allies wherever I can find them. The emails were a goldmine. My mother coordinated with other society women to exclude certain families from events based on race and religion. My father promised pharmaceutical contracts in exchange for political favors. Both of them discussed how to hide assets from taxation. Everything date-stamped, sender-verified, legally admissible. I hired a lawyer with my last $5,000. Not for a lawsuit, for protection. I needed to make sure everything I was about to do was legal. She reviewed my plan, made some adjustments, and gave me the green light. As long as I only shared the truth and documented everything, I was protected by whistleblower laws. 3 weeks after they'd canceled my wedding, I was ready. I had 700 pages of evidence, 60 hours of audio, and a distribution list that included every major news outlet in Arizona, the IRS, the FBI, the medical board, and the Pharmaceutical Ethics Committee. But I wasn't going to release it all at once. That would be too easy, too quick. My father had taught me that revenge was best served in courses. The first course was about to be served. The first phase of my revenge almost failed before it started. I'd scheduled the initial leak for a Monday morning, time to hit journalists' desks with their coffee. But Sunday night, my father showed up at our house. Not angry or threatening, worse. He was crying. He stood on our porch, this man who'd never shown emotion beyond rage or satisfaction, with tears streaming down his face. Said he'd made a mistake. That he'd been scared of losing his little girl to someone else. That he'd reconsidered and would pay for a small wedding if we kept it private. No announcement, no photos in the society pages, but he'd write the check. Marissa answered the door because I couldn't move. I was frozen at the kitchen table, finger hovering over the send button that would destroy him. She told him to leave, that his money came with too many conditions. But he pushed past her, found me in the kitchen, and actually got on his knees. Richard Kensington, who'd never knelt for anything, was on my kitchen floor begging. For 30 seconds, I wavered. This was my father. The man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd stayed up all night when I had pneumonia at age 7, who'd flown to Boston in a snowstorm to see me graduate from MIT. But then he said something that reminded me who he really was. He said if I proceeded with any plans to hurt the family, he'd make sure Marissa never practiced medicine again. He had connections at every hospital in the country. One word from him, and she'd be unhireable. I hit send while he was still talking. By Monday afternoon, Phoenix Medical Mysteries had published its first major exposé, The Charity Fraud Hidden in Plain Sight. No names yet, just documentation of millions in missing funds from unnamed medical charities. The Arizona Republic picked it up by evening. The medical community was buzzing with speculation. Tuesday brought the first setback. My mother had somehow gotten word of the blog, probably from one of her society friends who'd recognized the writing style. She'd hired a cybersecurity firm to trace the IP address. They got close, tracking it to our neighborhood before I managed to reroute through a VPN. I had to destroy my laptop and start over with a clean system. But Tuesday also brought an unexpected ally. Jonathan Ashford, the hotel heir my parents had tried to set me up with, called me. Turns out he was gay too, and had been forced into the closet by his own family. He'd been at the house when my parents had laughed about canceling my wedding, and had recorded the whole thing on his phone. He sent me the video, My mother actually reenacting how she thought two women would dance together, my father suggesting maybe I was just confused because Marissa looked masculine. Their cruelty was documented in high definition. Wednesday, I leaked the second story, FDA approvals for sale, how Arizona pharmaceuticals buy their way to market. Still no names, but anyone in the industry would recognize the drugs in question, all Kensington products. The FDA announced an investigation by Thursday morning. The retaliation came fast. My parents filed a restraining order against me, claiming I was harassing them. They also sued for defamation, though they couldn't specify what I'd said that was false since I hadn't named them yet. Their lawyer, the same one who'd added the morality clause to my trust, filed an emergency injunction to stop any further blog posts. But I'd anticipated this. My lawyer had set up a dead man switch. If I didn't log in every 24 hours, everything would automatically be released to every journalist, government agency, and social media platform we'd programmed. I informed my parents' lawyer of this during the injunction hearing. The judge, who seemed to know my father personally, still granted the injunction but looked worried. The setback that actually hurt came from within my own circle. 3 of Marissa's colleagues told her to distance herself from me. They couldn't afford to be associated with someone taking on the Kensingtons. One of them, a doctor she'd mentored, actually suggested she leave me until this blew over. Marissa told him exactly where he could put his suggestion, but it hurt her. She'd worked so hard to build her reputation, and now it was at risk because of my war. Friday brought a gift from an unexpected source. Camden's ex-husband, furious about being dragged into the Kensington drama, sent me recordings he'd made during family dinners. Arizona might be one-party consent, but he'd been that party. My parents are discussing how to manipulate judges. My mother admitted she'd planted drugs in a rival's car in college. My father explained how to launder money through art purchases. He'd been building his own insurance policy for the divorce he'd been planning for years. I spent the weekend organizing everything into a massive document I called the Kensington Files. 700 pages became 1,000. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed to present it strategically. A data dump would get attention but might miss key targets. I needed precision. My grandmother suggested the solution. Don't release it all at once. Release it to specific people who had personal stakes in specific crimes. The FDA got the drug approval bribes. The IRS got the tax evasion. The medical board got the prescription fraud. Each agency received exactly what they needed to start investigations, no more and no less. But the real strategic move was more personal. I sent individualized packages to each of the 300 wedding guests. Not the full files, just the parts that affected them directly. The senator who'd taken bribes got proof that my father had recorded their conversations. The judge who'd fixed cases got evidence that my mother had kept receipts. The society wives who'd bought pills from my mother got documentation that could end their marriages and social standing. Each package came with a simple note: the Kensingtons have kept records on all of us. This is what they have on you. The panic was immediate. My parents' phones rang nonstop as former allies demanded to know what else might be released. Trust evaporated overnight. The country club actually held an emergency board meeting to discuss revoking their membership before any more scandals broke. Saturday morning, the real setback hit. Marissa was suspended from the hospital pending investigation into our relationship. Not for any wrongdoing, but because the board, filled with my parents' friends, claimed they needed to ensure no hospital resources had been misused for personal gain. It was ridiculous, but it meant she couldn't work, couldn't see her patients, couldn't perform the surgeries she'd scheduled. I found her in our bedroom, still in her scrubs, crying for the first time since this started. She said maybe we should stop, just take the loss and leave. Start over somewhere else. She couldn't watch her career die for my revenge. That's when I realized I'd become my parents, so focused on winning that I was hurting the person I loved most. I told her I'd stop, call off everything, and take down the blog. But she looked at me and said no. Said if we stopped now, they'd win. They'd have successfully destroyed a gay couple for daring to exist publicly. She wouldn't let that be our story. We spent Sunday recalibrating. Marissa reached out to her medical contacts in other states, started interviewing for positions. If we were going to burn down the Kensington Empire, we needed an escape route. Meanwhile, I worked on the nuclear option, the one piece of evidence that would destroy them completely. My father's laptop. He'd left it at the house during one of his attempted reconciliation visits. He thought he grabbed it on the way out, but he'd taken Marissa's instead in his hurry. His actual laptop was still in our office, and he was too proud to admit his mistake and ask for it back. The password was pathetically easy, my mother's birthday. The contents were not pathetic at all. Years of correspondence with a Mexican cartel about using pharmaceutical shipments to smuggle fentanyl. My father, the respected CEO, was a drug trafficker. Not street-level dealing, but massive international smuggling that had probably killed thousands. I sat staring at that evidence for hours. This wasn't just fraud or tax evasion. This was life-in-prison level crime. This would destroy not just my parents, but potentially everyone associated with the company. Thousands of employees would lose their jobs. The stock would crash. Retirement funds would evaporate. But then I found something else in his emails. Correspondence about me. He'd been planning to have me institutionalized if I'd gone through with the wedding. He had a psychiatrist ready to declare me incompetent, papers drawn up to take power of attorney. The plan was to lock me up until I agreed to conversion therapy. The facility was already picked out, a place in Utah that had been sued multiple times for torture, but always settled out of court. Any hesitation, I had disappeared. They weren't just trying to stop my wedding. They were planning to imprison me. I made copies of everything, sent them to multiple secure servers, and prepared the final phase. But I needed one more thing, someone inside the company to corroborate the evidence. Someone who'd flip on my father to save themselves. That someone turned out to be a CFO, Marcus Webb. He'd been with the company 15 years, had a family, kids in college. When I showed him what I had, he went pale. Said he'd suspected something but never had proof. I gave him a choice, testify against my father or go down with him. He chose his family over his loyalty. The stage was set for the complete destruction of Richard and Diane Kensington. But I had to time it perfectly. Too soon, and they might find a way to spin it. Too late, and they might discover what I had and flee the country. The perfect moment was approaching, the annual Kensington Foundation Gala, where they'd be surrounded by everyone they'd ever wronged, everyone they'd ever threatened, everyone who'd been waiting for them to fall. The Kensington Foundation Gala was scheduled for May 15th, what would have been 5 days after my wedding. My parents had refused to cancel it, too much face to lose, too many important people already confirmed. They were going to stand in that ballroom, in front of Phoenix's elite, and pretend their family wasn't imploding. I had 72 hours to coordinate the most complex destruction of 2 lives ever attempted legally. First, I needed inside access to the gala. My grandmother, God bless her, was still on the board. She insisted I attend as her +1, claiming she needed assistance due to her age. The board couldn't refuse a 91-year-old founding member. My parents were furious, but trapped by their own rules about respecting elders. Second, I needed a media presence. Jonathan Ashford, my unexpected ally, was dating a producer at CNN. He arranged for a news crew to cover the gala as a puff piece about Arizona philanthropy. They had no idea what they were actually going to capture. Third, I needed the authorities ready to move. Through my lawyer, I arranged for FBI and IRS agents to be on standby. They couldn't arrest anyone without processing the evidence, but they could be nearby when everything went public. The day before the gala, I executed Phase 1. Every major news outlet in Arizona received a package at exactly 3 p.m. Inside, 40 pages of evidence about my mother's prescription drug ring, complete with names, dates, and amounts. By 6 p.m., it was the lead story on every local channel. Diane Kensington, society matron and charity queen, was a drug dealer. My mother called me screaming. Actually screaming, no words, just rage. When she finally formed sentences, she said I was dead to her. I was no daughter of hers. I destroyed everything they'd built for generations. I recorded the whole call, her admitting to the crimes while threatening me. Added it to the evidence pile. Phase 2 launched at midnight. The blog published everything about the FDA bribes, but this time with names. Richard Kensington had personally paid $14 million in bribes over 10 years. The post included recordings, bank transfers, even photos of him handing cash to officials. By morning, the FDA had announced a formal investigation and frozen all Kensington pharmaceutical approvals. The company's stock started plummeting at market open. 40% drop in the first hour. My father was in emergency board meetings all day, trying to convince them not to fire him immediately. He didn't know that 3 board members had already received packages about their own involvement. They were too busy trying to save themselves to save him. The morning of the gala, Phase 3 began. The IRS executed warrants on all known Kensington properties simultaneously. They found the art purchased with laundered money, the safes full of undeclared cash, the documents proving decades of tax evasion. They also found something I hadn't known about, a weapons cache. Apparently, my father had been preparing for some kind of apocalypse. Illegal weapons, including fully automatic rifles. That added federal weapons charges to his growing list. Marissa and I got ready for the gala in silence. She wore a stunning black dress. I wore a white suit, the one I would have worn to our wedding. We looked like we were going to a funeral, which wasn't entirely wrong. We were about to bury the Kensingtons. My grandmother picked us up in her ancient Bentley, driven by her personal chauffeur who'd been with her 40 years. She looked at us and said we looked beautiful, that she was proud of us, that my grandfather would have been proud too. Then she handed me a thumb drive. Said it contained her own insurance policy, recordings she'd made of my parents over the years, including them discussing their plans to have her declared incompetent and take control of her estate. We arrived at the Biltmore at exactly 7 p.m. The valet's eyes went wide when he saw me, but he took the keys without comment. The security at the door had a list, I wasn't on it. But I was my grandmother's medical power of attorney, and she made quite a scene about needing me for her medications. They let us in rather than risk the lawsuit of denying an elderly woman her medical care. The ballroom was perfect. Ice sculptures, orchid centerpieces, a string quartet playing Mozart. 300 of Phoenix's most powerful people in their finest clothes, drinking champagne that cost more than most people's car payments. And at the center of it all, my parents, holding court like nothing was wrong. My mother saw me first. Her face went through several expressions, shock, rage, calculation, before settling on a fake smile. She whispered urgently to my father, who turned and saw me. His face went red, then white. But they couldn't make a scene. Not here, not with everyone watching. I walked directly to them, Marissa on one arm, my grandmother on the other. The crowd parted, everyone sensing something momentous was happening. When we reached them, I smiled and said, loud enough for nearby people to hear, "Hello, Mother, Father, I wanted to thank you for the wedding gift." My mother, playing along, asked, "What gift, dear?" Her voice was poison wrapped in sugar. That's when I pulled out my phone and cast the video onto the ballroom's main screen. They'd left the AV system on for the charity auction later. The video Jonathan had sent me played in high definition, my parents laughing about canceling my wedding, mocking same-sex couples, using slurs I won't repeat. The ballroom went silent except for my father's voice echoing off the walls, saying that no daughter of his would marry a woman, that he'd rather see me dead. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, people pulling out phones to record. My parents stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. But I wasn't done. The screen changed to documents, the tax evasion, the prescription fraud, the bribery. Each page displayed for exactly 5 seconds, enough to read the highlights. Bank statements, emails, photos. The FBI investigation notice. The IRS seizure orders. The weapons charges. Then came the audio recordings. My mother is selling pills. My father arranged bribes. Both of them are planning to institutionalize me. The ballroom was so quiet you could hear the ice sculptures melting. The silence lasted exactly 7 seconds before chaos erupted. The senator who'd taken bribes pushed through the crowd toward the exit. The judge who'd fixed cases knocked over a champagne tower in his rush to leave. Society wives were deleting photos from their phones, trying to erase evidence of their association with the Kensingtons. But I wasn't finished. The screen changed again, this time to the cartel connections. emails between my father and known drug traffickers, shipping manifests showing pharmaceutical products used as cover for fentanyl smuggling, death statistics from overdoses linked to drugs that came through Kensington supply chains. My father lunged at me then, actually tried to grab my phone. But Marissa stepped between us. She'd been anticipating this. He shoved her, and she fell backward into a dessert table. That was an assault, on camera, with 300 witnesses, including the CNN crew that had mysteriously shown up early for their puff piece. Security moved in, but my grandmother raised her cane and said anyone who touched her granddaughter would be sued into poverty. She might have been 91, but Evelyn Kensington Wright still commanded respect. Security backed off. My mother tried a different approach. She started crying, these huge theatrical sobs, saying I was sick, that I needed help, that this was all delusion caused by my mental illness. But the documents were still cycling on the screen. Hard to claim delusion when the FBI and IRS had already verified everything. Then Marcus Webb, my father's CFO, walked onto the stage. He took the microphone from the bandleader and announced he'd been cooperating with federal authorities for weeks. He confirmed everything: the fraud, the smuggling, the bribes. He'd brought receipts, literally. Boxes of them, which he had hotel staff wheel in on carts. The FBI agents, who'd been waiting in the lobby, entered then. They didn't make arrests, that would come later, but their presence made everything real. This wasn't just a family drama. This was a criminal prosecution. My father tried to run. Actually tried to run, in his tuxedo and Italian shoes, through a ballroom full of people he'd threatened and blackmailed for years. He made it about 10 feet before the crowd closed in. Not to hurt him, but to demand answers. Where was their money? What about their investments? What about the charities they donated to? But the true climax came when Marissa stood up, brushed off her dress, and took the microphone from Marcus. She said she had something to add. The room went quiet again. She announced that she and I were starting a new foundation with the money we'd recover from the Kensington estate. A foundation for LGBTQ youth whose families had rejected them. The first grant would go to conversion therapy survivors. The second would fund legal services for queer kids disowned by their parents. The foundation would be called the Trevor Project Phoenix. Trevor after my brother who'd texted support but never stood up for me publicly. Then she said something that destroyed my parents more than any evidence could. She said that despite everything they'd done, we were still getting married. Tomorrow, in fact. At the courthouse, with my grandmother as our witness. We'd already gotten the license. The Kensingtons hadn't stopped anything, they'd just shown us who our real family was. The room erupted in applause. Not everyone, some were too complicit to clap, but enough. Enough to show my parents that their world had already moved on without them. My mother fainted. Actually fainted or pretended to, collapsing dramatically onto the marble floor. My father knelt beside her, looking around for help, but everyone stepped back. The CNN camera caught it all, the Kensingtons alone in the middle of a ballroom they'd once ruled, surrounded by empty space where their influence used to be. I walked over to them, stood looking down at the people who'd raised me and then tried to destroy me. My father looked up, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. He asked, quietly enough that only I could hear, what I wanted. What it would take to make this stop. I knelt down, got close enough to whisper. I said I wanted him to know what it felt like to lose everything. To have his future stolen. To be laughed at while his world collapsed. To be told he was wrong for existing. I wanted him to feel every moment of pain he'd caused me, magnified by the knowledge that he'd done it to himself. Then I stood up and walked away. Marissa took my arm, my grandmother took the other, and we left the Biltmore. Behind us, sirens were arriving. News vans were pulling up. The final destruction of the Kensington Empire was being broadcast live. In the car, my grandmother opened champagne she'd been saving since my grandfather died. She said he'd always known my parents were rotten, but had hoped grandchildren would soften them. She was glad I'd proved him wrong about the softening, but right about the rotten. We toasted to tomorrow, our wedding day, while my phone lit up with messages. Job offers for me from hospitals that wanted nothing to do with the Kensington name. interview requests from every major news outlet, messages from cousins and aunts and uncles who'd been too scared to support me before but wanted me to know they'd always loved me. But the message that mattered most was from Lily's mother. The 6-year-old had watched the news with her parents and had seen me stand up to the bad people. She wanted to know if I'd still be her doctor, if I'd still fix broken hearts. I texted back, always. 6 months later, the Kensington name only appeared in legal documents and federal indictments. My father was serving 12 years in federal prison for drug trafficking, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The raid on his office had uncovered more evidence than even I knew existed. He'd been running illegal drug trials on homeless populations, selling organs harvested from overdose victims, bribing judges for 20 years. Each new revelation added years to his sentence. My mother got 5 years for the prescription drug ring and tax evasion. She tried to blame everything on my father, claiming she was a victim of his manipulation. But the recordings of her laughing about selling pills to suburban mothers destroyed that defense. The judge, a woman whose own daughter had died from opioid addiction, showed no mercy. Trevor was under investigation, but hadn't been charged yet. He'd fled to Costa Rica, leaving his pregnant wife behind. She divorced him in absentia, took what little money was left in his accounts, and actually sent me a thank you card. She said I'd freed her from a family that would have destroyed her child the way they'd tried to destroy me. Camden surprised everyone by testifying against our parents. She'd kept records of years of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and forced medical procedures. Turns out our mother had made her get plastic surgery at 16 and had been drugging her with appetite suppressants since middle school. Camden got immunity in exchange for her testimony and used her share of grandmother's inheritance to get real therapy for the first time in her life. The pharmaceutical company collapsed within 3 months. The stock went to zero, the board fled to avoid prosecution, and the assets were sold to pay victims of their illegal drug trials. Thousands lost their jobs, which haunted me until I learned that several employees had been trying to whistleblow for years, but my father had threatened their families. They were relieved to be free. Marissa and I got married at the courthouse as promised, with my grandmother as witness and Jonathan Ashford as photographer. We wore the same clothes we'd worn to the gala, my white suit, her black dress. The justice of the peace was a lesbian who'd been with her partner 30 years, never able to marry until recently. She cried through the ceremony. We'd moved to Portland, where Marissa had gotten a position at Oregon Health Sciences University. I was consulting for biomedical companies, designing pediatric devices, making more money than I ever had at the hospital. We bought a small house with a big garden, got another dog to keep Gertie company, and started the IVF process again with the money my grandmother had given us as a wedding gift. The Phoenix LGBTQ Foundation, we'd changed the name, had raised $3 million in its first 6 months. Some from recovered Kensington assets, but mostly from other people who'd been wronged by similar families. We'd funded 17 kids' legal emancipations, paid for 23 therapy programs, and covered college tuition for 40 young people whose parents had cut them off for being queer. I still had nightmares sometimes. Dreams where my parents showed up at our door, where my father had escaped prison, where my mother had found ways to hurt us from behind bars. Marissa would hold me until the shaking stopped, reminding me they had no power anymore. My grandmother moved to Portland too, and said she wanted to be near a family that actually loved her. She bought a condo downtown, joined a radical knitting circle that made blankets for homeless youth, and started dating an 85-year-old retired professor named Margaret. When I expressed surprise, she said she'd been hiding her own truth for 90 years and was too old to keep pretending. The hardest part of the aftermath was the letters. My father wrote every week from prison, these long rambling things about forgiveness and family and how I destroyed our legacy. I never opened them, just forwarded them to my lawyer in case we needed evidence of continued harassment. My mother's letters were worse. She wrote about the grandchildren she'd never met, the family events I was missing, the life I could have had if I'd just been normal. But other letters came too. From kids who'd seen the news coverage and felt brave enough to come out. From parents who'd realized they were wrong and wanted to reconcile with their children. From medical professionals who'd been inspired to stand up against corruption in their own institutions. A 16-year-old in Alabama wrote that seeing me destroy my parents rather than let them destroy me had saved her life. Lily, my former patient, had her surgery with my remote consultation. The valve worked perfectly. She sent me a video of herself swimming for the first time, her little body moving through the water with joy that reminded me why I'd become an engineer in the first place. Her parents started a scholarship fund in my name at MIT for LGBTQ students in biomedical engineering. 6 months after the gala, I ran into someone unexpected at a coffee shop in Portland. Marcus Webb, my father's former CFO who'd flipped. He was in town for a job interview, trying to rebuild his life. He apologized for not speaking up sooner, for letting my father hurt so many people. I told him we all do what we need to survive. He said watching me stand up to them had taught him that sometimes survival isn't enough. It's been 3 years now since my parents laughed at me in their pristine Scottsdale living room. 3 years since they called my love a circus, my wedding a freak show. They're both still in prison. My father has 9 years left, my mother too. Their fortune is gone, seized by the government, distributed to victims, used to fund the organizations they would have hated. Last month, Marissa and I welcomed our daughter. We named her Evelyn, after my grandmother who passed away last year at 93. She died in her sleep, in her Portland condo, with a photo of all of us at our wedding on her nightstand. She left everything to Marissa and me, with instructions to use it to protect other families from people like my parents. Baby Evelyn has my eyes and Marissa's smile. When I hold her, I think about the trust fund my parents stole, the future they tried to erase. She'll never have a $20 million inheritance, but she'll have something better: parents who love her unconditionally, who will never laugh at her dreams or call her life a circus unless it actually involves elephants and she's happy about it. The Kensington name is toxic now in Arizona. The country club turned our family portrait into a cautionary tale. Literally, they use it in orientation to warn new members about the importance of background checks. The Biltmore banned anyone with the last name Kensington in perpetuity. The medical community treats it like a curse word. But in Portland, I'm just Sloan, the engineer who designs devices that save children. The woman married to the brilliant neurosurgeon. The mother pushes a stroller through the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, buying too many tomatoes because Marissa insists she'll make sauce even though she never does. Sometimes I Google my parents, just to check they're still locked up. My father has aged 20 years in 3. My mother has gone completely gray. They're in different facilities, haven't seen each other since the trial. I heard from Camden that they're getting divorced, fighting over who gets blamed for what in their respective memoirs they're both writing from prison. Publishers have already rejected both. Trevor died last year in Costa Rica, overdosed on the same fentanyl his family's company had helped smuggle. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. His son, who he never met, is being raised by his ex-wife and her new husband, a pediatrician who volunteers at free clinics. They send us Christmas cards. Camden and I have slowly built something resembling a relationship. She's in therapy, real therapy, working through decades of abuse. She brought her daughter to meet baby Evelyn last month. Watched them together and said she was glad the next generation would be different. That they'd grow up knowing love wasn't conditional on being perfect or straight or anything other than kind. The revenge I took on my parents wasn't just about justice. It was about survival. They tried to erase me for loving Marissa, tried to destroy my future for refusing to pretend. They thought their money and influence made them untouchable. They learned that when you build your empire on cruelty, it only takes one person with nothing left to lose to bring it all down. But here's what I've learned in these 3 years. Revenge doesn't heal you. It might balance the scales, might protect others from the same harm, but it doesn't undo the damage. I still flinch when someone laughs too loud. I still check our bank accounts obsessively, terrified someone will steal from us. I still sometimes wake up at 3 a.m., convinced I hear my father's voice saying I'm not his daughter. What heals is what comes after. Marissa sang to our daughter at 2 a.m. My patients send videos of their first days of school with their repaired hearts. The teenage kids our foundation helps, living their truth because we made it possible. The garden I planted last spring, where things grow because I nurture them, not because I force them. My parents are eligible for parole in 5 years. They'll petition, claim they're reformed, promise they've changed. They haven't. The letters they send Camden prove that, still blaming everyone else, still convinced they were victims of their ungrateful children. But it doesn't matter anymore. They have no power, no money, no influence. They're just two old people in prison jumpsuits telling anyone who'll listen about the empire they used to have. Meanwhile, I'm building something new. Not an empire. Empires are for people who need to rule others. I'm building a family, a community, a life where love isn't conditional and truth isn't negotiable. Where little Evelyn will grow up knowing she's perfect exactly as she is, whoever she loves, whatever she dreams. Last week, a reporter called asking for a comment about my parents' upcoming appeal. I told her I had no parents in prison. My parents were the people who loved me unconditionally, my grandmother who died holding my hand, my chosen family who stood by me when blood relatives fled, the community that caught me when I fell. The Kensingtons? They're just a cautionary tale now. A reminder that cruelty might win battles, but love wins wars. That you can steal money, destroy reputations, even laugh at someone's pain. But you can't steal their truth, destroy their love, or laugh away their determination to survive. If you're watching this from your own battle, know this: they only win if you let them erase you. Stand in your truth, even if you're standing alone at first. Document everything. Build your chosen family. And when they laugh at your pain, remember that their laughter is fear that you'll survive despite them, thrive without them, build something beautiful from the ashes of what they burned. My parents canceled my wedding, called it a circus, and laughed until they cried. 3 years later, they're in federal prison. I'm married to the love of my life, and our daughter is sleeping peacefully in the nursery they said would never exist. Turns out the real circus was thinking they could destroy love with laughter. The real freak show was their cruelty dressed up as family values. And the greatest revenge? It wasn't destroying them, they did that themselves. It was surviving them, thriving despite them, and building a life so full of love that their hatred became irrelevant. Subscribe if this story resonates with you, if you've survived your own family's cruelty, or if you just need a reminder that sometimes the good guys win. Drop a comment about where you're watching from. I'm curious how far these stories travel, how many of us are out there rebuilding after other people tried to break us. Love wins. It just sometimes needs a good lawyer and FBI connections to prove it.